Hey everybody.
Hello.
Hi. I am Alex. Thanks for coming and supporting your local independent bookstore as well as this wonderful author. Your attendance and book purchases let us keep hosting events like this, and we love them, so we appreciate it. Tonight we have the pleasure of hearing from Jasmin Graham about her new book, Sharks Don't Sink: Adventures of a Rogue Shark Scientist. Jasmin Graham is a marine biologist in the field of elasmobranch ecology and evolution, currently specializing in small-toothed sawfish and hammerhead sharks. She is the co-founder of Minorities in Shark Sciences, an organization providing support for women of color in the field of shark biology and ecology in order to foster greater diversity in marine science. Thank you. Hope you enjoyed the event, and remember you can grab a copy of Sharks Don't Sink up front after the reading if you don't already have one.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay. So hello everyone. Thank you for coming. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about the book and the work that I do as well. But first I will talk a little bit about the title because people always ask me about the title. So the first part of it, Sharks Don't Sink, is a little bit of a motivation for me. So a fun fact about sharks is, unlike bony fish, they don't have swim bladders. So swim bladders are these little pockets that fill with air. And that's why whenever fish die, they float belly up because these little air pockets are making them float. And so sharks don't have that. So their buoyancy does not come from a little air pocket. They have oils in their liver that kind of helps with buoyancy, but they actually are negatively buoyant, which means that if they stop swimming, they will sink. So you might ask, well, why don't sharks sink to the bottom then? Well, that's because they keep swimming. And so as long as a shark is swimming, they will not sink. So that is just like a cool biomechanics of how sharks work. As long as they're moving forward, they won't sink. And so that's why you see, usually when you see a shark resting on the bottom, it's because it's not moving. So like a nurse shark, they'll stick their head on the rocks and they'll stop swimming and they'll just lay there. But you always see them on the bottom when they're not moving, because as soon as they stop moving, they sink to the bottom. So the lesson here that I learned from sharks is that as long as you keep moving, you won't sink. And so as you read the book, you'll find that although I had some challenges and some ups and downs in my career and my journey, I just kept moving forward, and that's what kept me from sinking. And so that's why I titled the first part of the book Sharks Don't Sink. And then the second part of the book is called Adventures of a Rogue Shark Scientist, because of the challenges that I faced, I decided to go rogue, and I will talk a little bit about what that means as I go through this presentation. But I did want to start by reading a little bit of an excerpt from the book as sort of a teaser for those of you that haven't read it, because I know it just came out a couple days ago. So you may have not gotten a chance to read it yet. So I'm going to give you a little teaser here. In terms of their sheer ability to survive, sharks are incredible. They have a cartilaginous vertebra, which makes them light and fast for their size, and which has aided in their resilience. If a bony fish was the size of a shark, it would be much heavier and inflexible. Although they don't have a swim bladder to help them stay afloat, like many bony fish, sharks have large pectoral fins and oily livers that are less dense than seawater, which prevents them from sinking to the bottom of the ocean. Sharks have the same 5 senses we have, though much keener, plus a 6th sense. Amazingly, they can sense electrical charges, so that even when a prey or predator is almost entirely invisible to them, they can still sense the electrical impulse that the other creature's heart creates as it beats. In addition to being so wonderfully built, sharks have an incredible diversity of adaptations. Some sharks can swim in salt water and switch into brackish or fresh water. Their bodies actually have the ability to adapt to the change in salinity of the water. While some sharks need to keep moving in order to breathe, called ram ventilation, others have an adaptation that means they are able to be still and push water over their gills to take in oxygen, referred to as buccal pumping. Yet even though sharks are practically perfectly adapted to their role and environments as marine predators in so many ways, they still need our protection. Because perfection doesn't actually matter in nature. Luck plays a huge part in survival, an often overlooked aspect of evolution and science. Sharks are ideally adapted to marine life, but after surviving all known mass extinctions, thanks to natural selection and diversity, they now find themselves deeply unlucky. More than a quarter of the world's shark species are now threatened by extinction. So I don't just love sharks, I feel for them. I admire their persistence, their resilience, their ability to survive, to keep moving forward. But I'm also laser focused on their vulnerabilities, their need for our protection. I see myself and my people in sharks. All too often, Black people are perceived and treated much like sharks, feared, misunderstood, and brutalized, often without recourse, assumed to be threatening when so often we're the ones under threat, portrayed unfairly in the media so that others are predisposed to have a negative interaction with us. It's very hard to imagine a white person being shot at point-blank range after being pulled over by a cop for a simple traffic stop, or being throttled to death for selling cigarettes on a street corner. If it did happen, there would be a national outcry, and rules would be put in place to make sure it never happened again, but not for Black people. And in the same way, I try to imagine folks going around dragging dolphins behind boats or beating turtles to death. You can't. People would be up in arms if that happened. Campaigns to save the dolphins and turtles would be everywhere, but not for sharks. The reality is that sharks are essential. These prehistoric animals help maintain balance in an ecosystem by weeding out the weak and sick fish and by controlling the movements of their prey. And if an ecosystem collapses, life in our oceans dies. And so, eventually, do we. Our strength as humans lies in our amazing diversity within our own species and those around us, and we ignore this truth at our peril. As scientists, we recognize the importance of biodiversity. However, for some reason, many people in the field struggle to see that we need diversity not only in nature, but in research and experience. That is how we get true diversity of thought. In the same way that different animals bring different skills and ecosystem functions to create a harmonious environment, so too do different people with different backgrounds and lived experiences bring those skills to any scientific endeavor. All right, so that's a short excerpt from the prologue. So if you like that, I guess go buy the book, read more. Okay, so what is a rogue shark scientist? So I said I was going to explain the second part of that title. So rogue scientist is whatever the scientist wants it to be. So going rogue means that I don't operate under a large institution, which has pros and cons. Some of the pros are that I can research whatever I want. I can follow whatever scientific questions I want. It doesn't really have to be in line with some greater purpose or, explained or relevant to some like powers that be up somewhere. And it also means that I can involve whoever I want. And so there's not as much red tape and restrictions. So I work with students from different universities, from community colleges. We even bring high school students out to work with us. We also bring people that are not enrolled in school. And so with universities and things, oftentimes you can't bring non-students on university vessels, but I don't have that restriction. So whether somebody's enrolled in school or not, which there are a lot of barriers with being able to enroll in a university, and so having the ability to take people out that have this interest and passion, regardless of anything on their CV, is really important to me. Some of the cons are that I have to wear all the hats. So at like a university or a large institution, you have like people that are in charge of managing grants, but that's me. You have people that are in charge of like making sure everyone gets paid on time, but that's me. Making sure that, you know, things like insurance is paid and all of the things, and that's also me. All of those things are me. So that's like a con, but it's a small price to pay to be able to do all these amazing things. So here, I don't know how to make this. It's not showing up on the screen.
It's over there.
So far, your left, I think, corner, that's me and a bunch of Miss members at one of the conferences. So being able to take a bunch of members to conferences and pay for their travel instead of doing like silly reimbursement things that large institutions make you do, which are silly because it's like if somebody had $1,000, they would pay for the conference themselves. They don't have the $1,000. That's the problem. So expecting someone to pay $1,000 and be like, trust me, we're gonna pay you back in like about a month. Just put it on your credit card and trust us, is like a problem. So being able to just be like, I'm just gonna buy the plane ticket and the hotel room, and you don't have to put anything on your card, because I make the rules. It's me. So that's what I can do. So that's great because all of these people get to come and be part of conferences. A lot of the people in that photo, it was their first conference ever going there. And then I also get to work with kids. So this is us at spring break camp, next photo over. So I get to work with youth, and I go into schools. I bring students to the ocean as well to engage with the ocean and science in like a very fun, hands-on way. I get to pick the schools that I work with and prioritize the schools that are important to me. And I also get to be like, you don't have to pay for anything. I'll pay for the school bus to bring you here and all of that stuff. And so that means that I get to work with Title I schools and schools that don't usually have scientists come in their classroom and they don't usually get to have hands-on science. And I get to support teachers that are underpaid and overworked. So that brings me joy. I also get to spend like a lot of time on boats, which is awesome. And hanging out with cool critters, like this great hammerhead here that I'm hanging out with in that picture. And then the next picture that I'm on the boat there, I'm pulling in I think that's a black nose that we're pulling in right there. So also just getting to commune with these animals and learn about them, interact with them in the wild, and monitor the health of their populations and be really deeply connected and know when something is wrong pretty much immediately. And be out on the water all the time and say like, hey, the water is a different color and we're not seeing sharks and this is a problem, and being able to report those things to people. I also get to go and do policy work. So the bottom right picture is me with, on the far end, that's Angelo. He's my co-lead for the Ocean Group for the America the Beautiful for All Coalition, which is a coalition dedicated to making sure that 30% of our oceans are protected by 2030, using a Justice 40 lens. So making sure that social justice is applied to that, and whenever we're talking about conservation, we're including everyone in that conversation. And at the top, there's me in a panel with some really great people, including the president and CEO of the National Marine Sanctuaries Foundation, and the Aquarium Conservation Group and the Center for American Progress representative is there as well, and talking about these issues of how do we make sure that coastal communities, especially underrepresented communities, communities of color, low-income communities on the coast, are being heard and valued in conservation conversations. And those are the sorts of things that bring me joy. And I also get to play with like fun tech. That's what I'm doing down there, with receivers and stuff like that. So just last week I was at a conference and walking around, and I saw this booth and they were selling or advertising their cool technology, and I was like, oh, that's fun. I'm gonna buy a couple of those, and I could do that because I'm the president. So what do? So I work at the intersection between science education, conservation research, and social justice. So making sure that everyone understands the importance of the ocean and these scientific concepts that affect and impact them, and that they have actions that they can take to protect those things, protect those resources, and making sure that once I've engaged stakeholders, that I make sure that I take those voices to policymakers and folks that are actually making decisions, and then making sure that social justice piece is in there, that everyone is represented as we're doing all of that. So that's why I'm at the center of that Venn diagram, because I think all of those pieces are important. We need a well-educated public in order to engage them in conservation. But once they are engaged, we need to make sure that their voices are equally valued. So that's what I do. So a little bit about the current research that I have going on. So right now I'm working on a project looking at a harmful algal bloom that's called Florida red tide, which is this really nasty algal bloom that happens. It impacts humans in that it messes up our respiratory systems, and oftentimes people will get itchy if they're exposed to water that has a red tide bloom in it. It also impacts fish, so we have huge die-offs of fish during red tide events. You'll just see thousands of fish just floating dead in Sarasota Bay where I live. It's not great. It also smells just like dead fish. So it's just a really nasty situation. But as I mentioned, fish float, so you can count them and have an estimate of how many fish are dying. When sharks die, they stop moving, so they sink. So we can't count how many sharks die. So we actually have no idea how sharks are impacted by Florida red tide. And so this is a project that I'm working on right now with some collaborators, trying to understand, can they move in response to red tide? Can they sense that it's coming and get out of the way? Where do they go when they get out of the way? Is there a point where the red tide is too great that they can't avoid it? Does it impact their brains? Does it impact any other functions? Does it build in their body over time? So if they're exposed to one red tide and they survive, will that toxin that is released in the red tide build up in their bodies like every red tide that they're exposed to, or are they able to release it in some way? These are all questions that we don't know the answer to. So that's what I'm trying to figure out. Then we have our Iconic Oceans program. Iconic stands for Integrated, Coordinated, Open, Networked, and Inclusive Conservation. And that is a program that's global with members of Minorities in Shark Sciences, which I'll talk about shortly, which is a nonprofit that I co-founded. Our members in all of these different locations are working with their local communities, doing community-driven research on shark fisheries, particularly in communities that rely on shark meat for food, and understanding what sharks are being caught, how many are being caught, is it sustainably being fished, how can we make it sustainable? Are there endangered species that are being fished? Can we switch fishers from eating the endangered species to eating the non-endangered species? All of those sorts of things. Right now we have members in Sri Lanka, India, Nigeria, and Brazil working on these issues, and so it's a really fun experience to get to like connect with fishers, give them power and say in what's going on, communicate with them, and be partners in trying to protect fish and sharks because they need them to survive, because that's what they rely on as their food source. So they also want them to be around for a long time. So they make great partners in that. We also have a bull shark project that's going to be starting up here in North Carolina in April. So there is an area that we think is maybe a bull shark nursery, meaning that pregnant bull sharks go and they drop their pups there. We call it pupping. That's what you call when sharks give birth, because little baby sharks are called pups. Fun fact. So we think that the female bull sharks are pupping in some of the coastal areas of North Carolina, particularly like the Sounds, like near Wilmington and Wrightsville Beach. So we are going to be tagging some pregnant bull sharks. So we'll be ultrasounding sharks. So yes, you can ultrasound sharks, just like you can ultrasound people. You ultrasound sharks, you can see that they're pregnant. We will be putting satellite tags on them to track their movements and see where they go. And I mentioned that I went to this conference and they had cool tags. So they have tags that you can actually put in the birth canal of sharks. And then when they drop their pups, it drops the tag and you can see exactly where they drop their pups. And I was like, I want like 10 of those. So we're going to try out those tags and see where these pregnant bull sharks are dropping their pups. So it should be fun. I'm also working on a local ecological knowledge project that I'm wrapping up actually with my dad, who is an avid fisherman. And he's from Myrtle Beach, and a lot of my family is in Myrtle Beach on that side. And I'm actually interviewing fishers in that community to understand how the fish populations have changed over the years that they've all been fishing. And I'm collecting that information and publishing how that has changed from the perspective of the fishing community. And the reasons why they think that is. And then the last thing is deep sea sharks. So in a week and a half, I'm going out in the Gulf of Mexico for a week on a vessel called the Western Flyer with a brand new remotely operated vehicle, or ROV, called the Taurus. And we are going to try some very radical things looking at deep sea sharks, which is another fun thing you get to do as a rogue shark scientist, is you convince people to follow along with your wild and wacky ideas. So I went to someone and I said, hey, can I squirt ink in sharks' faces and try to collect muscle tissues from them while they're actively swimming in the deep sea? And they were like, we could try. And so we're going to try that with an ROV and try and study deep sea sharks, and also do some baited remote underwater video to try and count the shark species in some of these areas in the deep sea in the Gulf of Mexico. And that's going to be really exciting. And we're taking a bunch of students who have never been out to sea before, and hopefully they don't get seasick. Otherwise it's going to be a not fun week. Okay, so I also mentioned that I do social justice work. So I mentioned the America the Beautiful for All Coalition. I also am a co-principal investigator on a National Science Foundation funded grant called Creating Cultural Change in Small to Medium-Sized Professional Societies. And the societies that we're using are part of the joint meeting of ichthyologists and herpetologists, which are people that study fish and reptiles. And we are trying to see if we can, by shifting the mindset of people within these societies, does that make real change in the culture of science as a whole? So we're working on that. And then I also mentioned that I co-founded Minorities in Shark Sciences. There are some pamphlets in the back if you're interested in learning more. But we are an organization dedicated to broadening participation in marine science, particularly the study of sharks and rays. And we do that in a number of ways through our youth engagements, like I mentioned, going into schools, bringing schools out, bringing community groups out, spring break camps, summer camps, all of those things. We also work with early career folks that are trying to get involved, or people that are switching careers by providing professional development experiences, workshops, training programs, internships, fellowships that are all paid. All of our things are free, and all of our internships you get paid, your travel is paid, and you get free housing, because we don't want there to be any sort of barrier to participating in those things, because that's been a huge problem in marine science historically. And then we also support people doing research, like I mentioned, the Iconic Oceans program. So we facilitate collaborations and mentorship for people like all the way through their careers. So that's just a little bit about what we do. And if you want to learn more, there's a pamphlet on the back table. I also do a lot of science education stuff. So there's a YouTube series called Sharks Unknown with Jasmin Graham. It's on PBS Terra on YouTube. It has 8 episodes. Every episode follows a different MISS member and their research, and every episode has a different shark species highlighted. And it's fun, and you get to meet a lot of different shark species. So if you're feeling like sharky, just log on to YouTube and watch those. They're like 12 or 13-minute episodes, so it's not a huge time investment. I also have been on National Geographic Shark Fest a couple times. So the show that's this summer I was on is Shark Beach with Anthony Mackie, Gulf Coast. And we talk about depredation, which is where sharks take some or all of fishermen's catches. And so talking about that and the frustrations the fishermen have and why that's happening and how do we work to prevent that and work with fishermen. And it's great because it also tells this from the fisherman's perspective as well. So also check that out. It's on Hulu and Disney Plus, and I think it's coming on National Geographic like randomly throughout this month. So I don't know, check your guide on your TV, see when it's coming on. And then I have a LLC, Learning with Jasmin, where I go and do speaking events and engagements and stuff like that, going to talk to people about sharks and why they're awesome. So why this book, why now, is also another question that I get. And I was asked by my literary agent, Chad, who I did not know at all. He just cold emailed me and said, "Hey, have you ever thought about writing a book?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Would you think about writing a book?" And my immediate reaction was, I don't feel like I have enough to say. And then he said, "Well, can we talk about it?" And we started talking about it. And then I started thinking more about, why was my first reaction that I feel like I don't have enough to say, or that what I have to say isn't valuable enough to go in a book? And I started thinking about imposter syndrome, and maybe the reason why I thought that was because I had never seen anyone my age, my career level, my race, my gender, writing a book. And so then I was like, well, that feels like I need to write a book then. So the next early career Black woman doesn't hesitate and feels like she has valuable things to say. So that's why I wrote the book. Okay, so I have a QR code here that you can scan. It takes you to my website, and it has like a whole bunch of resources so you can learn about all the projects that I talked about. It has links to go learn about MISS and some other really great ocean justice organizations that you can follow. And I will take any questions anyone has. Yeah.
Hey, I was wondering if there's any media like documentaries or other books that you've read that you found to be really impactful or just important reads.
So there's a new documentary out called Older Than Trees that's about sharks that's really great. There's a documentarist named Inka Cresswell that has several really great ocean documentaries. I highly recommend. She makes really powerful documentaries. Let's see, what else? Those are the top ones that I think off the top of my head. Yes.
I read the book and I thought it was amazing, and I love the way that the chapters kind of like went back and forth between not necessarily time periods, but like entire like switching. Like honestly, it felt like location based most of the time, and I was wondering if that was intentional, or did when you started after Chad was like, oh hey, you're in a book, you're like and you had all these ideas and you were like, okay, now what? And I just really liked the way that you put it together. I was wondering if there's anything like specific behind that.
Yeah. So it was intentional. So originally I really wanted it to be like vignettes. Just because that's sort of how my mind works. How I connect things is through like these vignettes. And I really have this like concept of things are the sum of all their parts. That's like what we think about in science, that like you put these things together and they make this. And people are the sum of all their parts, and careers are the sum of all their parts. And so I really wanted it to feel like the sum of all of these parts. And so I wanted it to have some sort of like disjointedness to it, but it to be like connected by an overarching theme. And so that's why it sort of like jumps, so that it shows you this is connected to this, is connected to this, is connected to this, but it's not like linear in the traditional book format, because I'm not traditional in like any way, so I didn't want the book to be traditional. Yes.
So how hard is it to find a shark pupping ground?
How hard is it to find a shark pupping ground? Pretty hard. Yes. So for something to be declared officially a nursing ground, it has to go through several steps. There are several things that have to happen in order for it to be officially notated, like legally, as this is a shark nursery. So that's why we're doing our study, because the first qualification has been met, which is that a scientist who's part of our network, Chuck Bangley, who's a friend of Myth's, he found that there were young of year bull sharks, basically bull sharks that were born within a year, in the sounds, and that's the first qualification, is that you have to find baby sharks in the area, which makes sense. The second qualification is that they have to be there for a certain amount of time, and they have to spend the majority of their like pup years there. So it can't be like, oh, they just swam over there for a little bit to go eat or something like that. They have to like be residing there. And then you also have to have a certain number of females going there. So it can't be like, oh, there's one or two that happen to be dropping their pups there. It has to be like a significant portion of the population pupping there. So it is easy to find one out of those three criteria. It's hard to like hit all of them and have it officially declared as a nursery ground. It takes like a lot of years of research. Yes.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to read this. I can't wait. And I really appreciate your talk. It's just really a lot of resonant material in what you have to say. I did not know that sharks could pick up electrical signals from the heart of creatures around them. That is really cool, but it made me concerned about this. So the chips that the tags that you're putting on, will that interfere with? Won't that be an electrical signal?
No, it's a different signal. Yeah. So yeah, the animal trackers are very complex because you have to find something that does not disrupt the animal's natural processes. So there's a lot that goes into it, which is why the tags are so expensive and they take so long to like create and develop. Which is why I was really excited whenever they had this birthing tag that they just developed. It takes decades to develop a animal tracking tag because they have to go through all these rigorous tests and make sure that it doesn't interfere with anything. So the I'll call it a pulse for so I don't have to get into too much detail. But the pulse that it sends, it's logging data, but it's not sending an electrical charge until it pops off the animal and floats to the surface, and then it transmits the data to the satellite directly when the satellite is overhead. So yeah.
Cool. Oh my God. That's even better than I imagined.
Yeah.
That's like, I don't know what I imagined.
Yeah, so it actually is, so trying to like condense this as quickly as possible. So it has detectors on it that sense light and depth and temperature, and it is basically estimating where it is based on those things. And then it has a little metal piece that basically they know how long that metal piece takes to corrode in salt water. And so they know that like this metal piece takes 60 days to corrode in salt water. So in 60 days, this tag will pop off of this animal and it will float to the surface of the ocean. And then once it gets to the surface, it knows when a satellite is over it. So a satellite is over it for about 20 minutes, 4 times a day. That's how satellites work. And so it'll be like, there's a satellite. Here's my information. And then you're on a computer anywhere in the world and you pull the information down.
That's awesome. I figured you thought of it.
Yeah, and then there's another type of tracker that we use that's an acoustic transmitter that emits like a sound wave, but it's at a frequency that no ocean animal hears or is bothered by.
Is that high or low?
So it is a low frequency for them. It's a high frequency for us. Yeah.
Thank you.
I was gonna ask, how do you guys use sharks as an indicator for how the climate is changing and how specific areas are being impacted by different pollution, especially because sharks are have such heightened senses, so like noise pollution or light pollution?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So when an ecosystem is collapsing, the first thing that goes is predators. So if you go to a reef and you're like scuba diving, so a lot of times people ask me, like whenever I go diving or something, like, are you afraid when you see a shark? No, I'm afraid when I don't see a shark, because that means that the reef is not healthy. So there are some reefs in Florida that I haven't seen a shark on in quite some time, and that's very concerning. Because if a reef or mangroves or seagrass, whatever the habitat is, can't sustain predators, that means that it does not have stability, because those are who goes first. So they're an indicator species in that way. In terms of pollution, they are an indicator. So that's one reason why for the Florida Red Tide Project, we take a little sample from their muscle tissue using like a biopsy punch, which is like the same thing that dermatologists use to remove like a mole. So we use that, and we actually can look at the toxins in their muscle. And that actually is a really good indicator because toxins bioaccumulate. So if like imagine that shellfish are, filtering the water and they have, let's say 20 amount of this pollution. And then let's say that a fish comes over and eats 10 of those shellfish. Now they have 200. And then like a shark comes and eats 10 of those fish. It just keeps multiplying by 10. So they're going to have the most of that pollutant in their body. So they're a really good indicator for that. And then in terms of things like climate change, sharks are cold-blooded, so most of them have no control over their internal body temperature whatsoever. There are a few that can control it a little bit, but whatever the temperature of the water is, that's what temperature their internal body is. And so they have to move to adjust accordingly. And if they can't, then their bodies start being impacted negatively. So you'll see like sharks are migrating earlier. They're moving further north. All of these things, people are seeing sharks of different species that they've never seen before in different areas. That's because the oceans are warming. And they're like, well, I got to get out of this hot water. I got to go further north. I got to move. So in that way, yes, you can see the impacts of climate change affecting sharks. Yes.
How can, I'm so interested in this bull shark project, maybe because it's close, you know, it's like water that I've swum in, it's, you know, not that I've swum with bull sharks, but knowingly. But so how can someone who's got like a connection support the specific projects? I'm also curious how you do it all, and I'm also curious about funding.
Yeah, so if you scan that QR code, one of the links is to the North Carolina Bull Shark Project specifically, and you can donate to that project specifically if you want. There's also options for like certain donation levels. You can actually come out with us and tag bull sharks if you're interested in that. We are also hoping to get an app up and running to share this data for people where they can log in and see like this pregnant bull shark is swimming around over here and like we think it dropped its pups here. So we're hoping to have that. The project is launching in April. We're hoping to have that within 2 years, like start sharing the data out publicly once we like kind of know a little bit more about what's going on and we test that these birthing tags are actually working, because we would be like the second researchers to use them. So we got to make sure that they work well. Yeah, we're hoping to kind of have like a public facing page that people can follow the work as well. So yes, that. Funding in general. So we have probably about 30% of our funding comes from individual donors. Hint, hint, wink, wink. And then about 30% comes from private foundations. So we're supported by a variety of foundations of various sizes. And then the remaining of it is a mix of corporate sponsors, of like federal money, and I blanked on the other thing I was going to say. Federal money, corporate sponsors. No, those are the two things. Federal money and corporate sponsors. Yeah. How do we do it?
How do you do it all? I mean, it's so like from like here in Brazil and Nigeria and North Carolina and in your hometown, like it's, and the communities that you're touching, it's just truly cool.
Yeah, so we have about 500 members representing 33 countries. And so we have members that are doing work, and we're kind of just supporting them doing the work that they're doing. And I coordinate and make sure that they have money to do what they are doing already, and that they have the whatever they need infrastructurally, whether that's permits, whether that's visas, you know, all of those sorts of things. And then in terms of finding funding, I actually really like writing grants. It's a weird thing about me. I find it actually quite relaxing to write grants. And so I write a lot of grants, and I'm told I'm really good at asking for money. So yeah, I ask people for money shamelessly and often. And a lot of times people are like, sure. here's a couple $1,000. And I was like, great, thanks. Yes.
I'm an independent scholar myself, and so a lot of what you're saying resonates. And I'm in a field where there aren't many people like me, so I'm a legal historian. And there are very few Black legal historians, even though people of color are impacted by the law in very different ways. So someone asked me this question the other day, and I was thinking about when you started, and they said, what is the really big question you want to answer with your career? Like, is there a question that you are kind of chasing? Like, obviously the nursery location is a big one, but is there a big overarching question that you really want to answer to help us understand sharks?
Oh, man, that's hard. Putting into one question.
There are multiple ones. I mean, it seems like there are lots of questions here, a lot of unknowns about sharks, so the potential is...
Yeah. I mean, yeah, there are so many unknowns about sharks, especially given that sharks are so old and they've been here so long, and we like really don't know a lot about them. I guess I could sum it up in, I want to figure out how we help sharks survive this 6th mass extinction event, which is largely driven by people. All of my work is kind of, how do we get out of the way and help sharks continue to survive and thrive? So I guess that is the overarching question, and all of those things sort of lead to that of like, if bull sharks are having nursery areas right where people are living, how do we make sure that we're not disrupting that? How do we make sure that we're not making red tide worse? How do we make sure that we're fishing sustainably? All of those things are tied into how do we make sure that we don't cause the mass extinction of these amazing animals. And I saw a hand here.
Yeah. First of all, I can't imagine how life-changing it would be to be a student in a project like this. It's a completely different pathway for a lot of people, I would think. How hard is it to recruit students? Because it seems like a lot of people don't think about the ocean in general, and then you add to that sharks, and a lot of people are scared of sharks. Like, is it hard to get high school age students interested, or are they just on board?
It's harder to get their parents on board.
Okay, yeah.
In terms of getting high schoolers on board, I'll tell you what happens every time I walk into a classroom or we bring high schoolers out. There's 3 groups of people. There's like too cool for school over here. That's just like arms folded, totally cut off. They're like, science is lame. I don't want to be here. We got those people. Then we've got the people that are like, I actually think this is really cool, but I feel like it's not cool for this to be cool, so I'm going to try to hide that I think this is really cool. And then there's like the little Jasmines that are like, I don't care. I think this is cool. I'm just going to be a nerd. So those people, you're like, yes, you're already in it. You're great. These people, you're like, all right, you're in it. I see you. So I mostly focus on the too cool for school. And they come around almost every time. By the end of the day, they have come around, because it always starts with, I don't want to get wet, I don't want to get sandy, I don't want to touch that, I don't want to do that. And then next thing I know, they are like swimming off to sea, and I'm like, no, you can't go that far away. Come back. And it's like a total flip. Because when you give kids permission to be weird, that is actually the default of humans, I would argue, is that we want to be weird, and it's society that's telling us that we can't. And whenever you give them an environment where they're allowed to be weird, they're like, oh yeah, we're getting weird. So yeah, I think that kids are, and especially like at first it's like the too cool for school are often like cut off from science because someone in their life has told them that they're not good at science or that they shouldn't be doing science. And then whenever you give them the opportunity to be like, oh, that this thing that you do is actually science. And I usually try to make that connection in some way of like, you're already doing science. If you like to play Minecraft, that's science. It's coding, that's computer science. If you like to do this, that's science. And then when they start realizing, oh, I am doing science, we always start out with like, what do you wonder about? And kids are like, I don't know, I don't wonder about things. I'm like, yes, you do. Yes, you do. What have you ever thought about? What questions do you have? And usually, like, the too cool for school will start out with something snarky, like, I don't know, why do adults always ask kids dumb questions? And I'll be like, cool, let's go with that. And I will build a scientific question off of that, and they will be like, oh, dang, she got me. And I'm like, that's a scientific question. You just asked a scientific question. You could do an experiment on that. And they're like, dang it, I fell into the trap. And yeah, usually they are like, okay, I guess science isn't that bad. And their perception of science flips. Their perception of the ocean flips. And you just have to give them permission and not let them back down and be like, we're getting weird. I just get more weird. And then they're like, oh, she cray. Like, she is like in there. She is like neck deep in the ocean. She has her hair wet. Okay. Her hair is like my hair and she got it wet and she's not panicking. So I guess I can get mine wet. And it's like, it's a difference. It's a flip that happens. So usually it's the parents that are like, you're taking my kid to do what? They're gonna tag sharks, you said? They're like, what the permission slip says, shark tagging. Did I read that right?
Do the parents then want to do it once their kids?
Yeah, once their kids get back, they're like, wait, do you have this for adults? Which we do. We do have it for adults. Yes.
With specifically with teenagers and stuff like that, I find that a lot of like YA books or like kids nonfiction and stuff like that, there's a really large gap between like much younger and then between like adult nonfiction. And I thought your book was great at being like not like too like not understandable, if that's okay to say, and like an opening. But also, if you ever want to write something for kids or YA or graphic novel, you should, because you have a great voice for kids. And I can see why you enjoy doing like school stuff and working with them so much, because like there's no like there's hardly any like nonfiction stuff that's like actually like good. And for like to be encouraging to keep kids reading it, because it's like nobody wanted a biography of this one person that there's 100 biographies of. But if you would give them something like with what you're doing, like I think that would change a lot of stuff. So whatever crosses your mind, let us know. I want to read it.
Thank you. It's in the works. Yes.
To piggyback off of what you said, I noticed like, especially for kids, like a lot of shark related media is like boys like sharks. And so I think it's so awesome that you did this, and that it's just really cool to see not a white man like at the forefront of stuff. And that's really cool. And
Yeah.
I also wanted to ask, do you do any of the stuff you work on, do you ever interact with NC State and their campus in Wilmington, or like UNC Wilmington? Do you ever work with them?
Yeah, so we have a couple of members at UNC Wilmington and at Duke as well. And so they will actually be involved in the North Carolina Bull Shark Project. Yeah.
What are piggybacking on what are some collaborations that need to happen that aren't happening yet?
So we would like to get more involved with even more aquariums. So our goal is to like connect with every aquarium in the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. We are like 20% there. Because aquariums have such a huge impact on people, especially in landlocked areas where they can't get to the ocean. That's like their first go at being exposed to the ocean. And so that's something that we really are trying to do, is connect with more aquariums, especially in landlocked areas. You have a question in the back, Miss Carolyn?
Well, I was going to piggyback on all of what you were speaking about. You were talking about the cool groups and the different groups that you found. And I used to be a Girl Scout leader, and I was also in this organization a couple of years ago, Women in Science. And so, the Women in Science decided they were going to have this big, gathering and have all the Girl Scouts come and all the other kids in the, in Durham and Chapel Hill, Raleigh area, just to come to this event. And they stood there, these women stood there and talked about, I work in a lab, I use a beaker. It was real boring. It was boring to me to hear them give this presentation to these children, And so I watched my little girls who I had taken, to this event, and they were like, leaning to the side and, smacking their lips and looking at the sky and all that, that kind of, interaction that they had at that meeting. So I immediately gathered my little group and I got them in the car and they were mad with me. They were just so upset with me, in my car. And I asked them, what they didn't like. And they said it was boring. And then I took something, as you were saying, take a question or a scenario that I thought about was like making potato salad, and so, and I asked them, so what do you do when you make potato salad? Trying to make the science interesting to them. And so they started telling me about the different ingredients, because we're talking about chemistry, labs, and those kind of things. And they said, I said, what do you do with grandmama with the potato salad? Because most of my little girls were, from living with their grandparents and and they said potatoes. That was one said, she leaned back on the car, And then another one said she puts pickles in it, They told me about the mayonnaise. They just told me about the different ingredients they put in. And I said, that's what chemistry is all about. When you cook, I said, it's like chemistry. You put all these ingredients together, and I said the mayonnaise is make it bond together, because the people were talking about bonds and all this stuff over their heads, And so by the time we got there, they were mixing up all kinds of little things, the cakes, how, we put the eggs in to make one big product, take all these little pieces and make one big product. So again, as she was saying about writing books for children and, and getting on their level and something they can understand. And the same thing that you're doing tonight, I'm just thinking about all the little girls that I know that will just, and fellows that I would know that will just enjoy this presentation, and we listen to it as adults, but them on their level now, they'll be so excited about it, just trying to get them involved. So I just want to share that little piece of story. Getting kids involved and working on their levels and just including them in the conversation.
Yeah, I feel like scientists are really bad at talking. I can say that as a scientist who knows a lot of scientists. Not great at it. Not great at communication, and like people use jargon, and jargon is like, I always say if you can't explain something without using jargon, you don't know what you're talking about. And I do like science communication things, and I teach scientists how to communicate, and they get really offended when I say, if you can't explain this without jargon, you don't know what you're talking about. And they're like, what? And I'm like, well, if you can't explain to a kindergartner, you don't actually know what you're talking about. And I stand by that statement, because if you can't break it down all the way to its base, you don't have a strong understanding of it. And that's all you have to do. You don't have to give them incorrect information. It's not dumbing it down. It's breaking it all the way down to its base. You have to understand it completely in order to do that.
Well, thank you for breaking it down to us.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, everyone.